Jenny Millers woke every morning before the town had stretched from its sleep. She washed her face with cold water from a rust-stained sink and tied her brown hair into a bun without a mirror. Her apartment above the pharmacy was quiet, and had been for years. No footsteps overhead. No voices through the walls. Just the faint hum of the cooler from the soda machine downstairs and the ticking of the dented kitchen clock that had belonged to her mother. At exactly 5:30 a.m., she began her walk to Rosie's diner, her breath visible in the autumn air, her footsteps echoing softly along cracked sidewalks that remembered better days. The town around her had stopped growing years ago. The hardware store still advertised paint that hadn't been stocked since the Clinton administration. The laundromat's vending machine spat out only warm soda. And Rosie's diner still opened at 6 a.m. sharp, just as it had every morning since 1954. Jenny opened up each day with the same quiet ritual. She unlocked the door, turned on the overhead fans that barely worked, flipped the closed sign to open, and brewed the first pot of coffee. The old stools at the counter squeaked when she wiped them down. The ketchup bottles always needed refilling. And the first customer was always Harold, a retired postman with a voice like gravel and stories that never changed. She smiled for each one of them, asked about grandkids and bowling leagues, and kept her sorrow folded neatly inside like a napkin in her apron pocket. No one asked about her life, and she never offered. Her parents had died young. Her aunt, who'd taken her in, had long since moved to Arizona. Jenny was used to being invisible. She didn't mind it, most days. It felt safe. It was a Tuesday in early October when she first noticed the boy. He arrived just after the first rush of morning coffee drinkers, when the diner was quiet except for the sound of eggs frying and the occasional creak of the back door. He slipped in like a shadow, no taller than the booth seat itself, a too-large backpack hanging off his shoulders and a paperback novel clutched tightly in one hand. He chose the farthest booth from the entrance, farthest from the kitchen, too. A place to see and not be seen. He ordered only a glass of water, voice barely above a whisper, eyes cast down. Jenny brought it with a paper straw and a quiet nod. He didn't look up. Just placed the book on the table and began to read. The next day, he returned at the same time. Same seat. Same glass of water. Same silence. On the third morning, she placed a second napkin beside the straw. On the fourth, she added an extra sugar packet. By the end of the second week, she knew the pattern, 7:15 in, 7:55 out. No food. No noise. Just the sound of pages turning and the slightest shifting of a boy who was trying not to take up space. The kitchen crew started to notice. "You see that kid again?" asked Kathy, who worked the grill. "He yours or something?" Jenny shook her head and filled another coffee pot. She didn't want to talk about it. Talking might make it stop. It was on the 15th day that she brought him pancakes. The kitchen hadn't made extras. There was no mix-up. She simply set the plate down in front of him without comment. He looked up, startled, eyes wide. She gave a half-shrug and said something about the cook making one too many, then turned away before he could refuse. She watched from the counter, pretending to rearrange the pie display. The boy didn't touch the food at first. Then, slowly, like someone expecting it to be taken away, he picked up the fork. When she returned later, the plate was clean. His book still open. His face expressionless. He whispered thank you when she cleared the plate. After that, it became routine. Some days it was scrambled eggs. Other days oatmeal with brown sugar. Jenny always made it look like a mistake, a forgotten order, an extra plate, something the kitchen couldn't sell. The boy never questioned it. He never asked for anything else. He never spoke more than necessary. But Jenny watched him change in small ways. He sat straighter. His eyes lifted for a second longer when she passed. He didn't flinch when the doorbell jingled. Others began to notice, too. "Who's the kid?" asked Harold one morning, stirring his coffee absently. "He ever pay?" Jenny only smiled. "Don't know," she said. "Seems hungry." Kathy pulled her aside in the back near the pantry. "You're feeding a stray," she said, not unkindly. "They disappear. They always do." Jenny nodded, her voice low. "I used to be that hungry, too." It was the first personal thing she'd said in months. The boy never gave a name. Jenny never asked. He kept his distance, angled his seat so that he could see both the window and the door. His book changed every few days, but his presence didn't. He was consistent in a world that rarely was. Rumors began to float among the regulars. A businessman in a crisp shirt muttered that the diner was turning into a soup kitchen. Another patron complained that times have changed, now kids just expect handouts. Jenny said nothing. She wiped tables and refilled mugs and made sure the boy's glass of water never went empty. He started to leave a folded napkin on his plate each day, neatly tucked over the silverware as if to say thank you without words. She noticed the small holes in his backpack, the way he wrapped the straps with tape to keep them from fraying. He was a boy who had learned not to hope out loud. Jenny understood. Every time she brought him a plate, she imagined a younger version of herself on the receiving end. Alone, unseen, waiting for someone to notice. But she didn't offer him pity. Just pancakes. And quiet. And the kind of kindness that doesn't ask anything in return. The first time someone left a note, it was folded beneath the register. Jenny found it while counting coins after the lunch shift. No envelope. No signature. Just a single line on line paper, "Feeding strays on the clock? Must be nice." She didn't react. Just folded it again and tucked it into her apron pocket, then threw it out when she got home. She told herself it didn't matter, but she checked the windows before she went to bed that night. The comments became more frequent after that. At first, they were just murmurs, customers who spoke a little louder than necessary, making sure she could hear. "You see how comfortable they get when you start giving things away," one woman said, buttering her toast. "Next thing you know, you'll have the whole school in here." Then came the questions from management. Carl, the regional manager who only visited twice a month, pulled her aside near the walk-in freezer. He'd heard something, he said. About an unaccompanied minor. About liabilities. About food cost. He didn't accuse her directly, but his meaning was clear. Jenny nodded, smiled, promised to keep things by the book. But she still brought the pancakes. Every morning. Same time. Same booth. The boy never asked why. And then, just like that, he stopped coming. For 3 mornings in a row, the booth stayed empty. Jenny kept looking up every time the door opened, expecting to see the too big backpack, the book, the cautious eyes. But no one came. On the 4th morning, she placed a plate of pancakes on the counter anyway. Habit. Or hope. She poured the syrup and set the fork beside it. Watched the plate sit untouched for 20 minutes before clearing it away. By noon, she'd already heard the story. Someone had seen a police officer escorting a child into a cruiser near the East bus stop. No details. Just a rumor. A sighting. But she knew. She stood a little longer at the window that afternoon, looking at the cracked sidewalk where the boy used to walk in from. The next morning, Jenny's apron was gone from its hook. It wasn't missing, just no longer welcome. Kathy didn't say anything when she handed Jenny the manager's note. It was typed. Short. Official. It cited policy violations and unauthorized food expenses. Jenny read it once, then again. Her hand stayed still. Her face didn't change. She clocked out in silence. The diners that morning didn't look at her. Some had already heard. A few watched, briefly, before returning to their eggs and bacon. No one stopped her. No one said goodbye. She left through the back door. That evening, she tried to explain herself to the district office over the phone, but the call was brief. Local discretion, they said. We support our managers. There would be no appeal. It didn't take long for the story to change. The online gossip sites hinted she'd been stealing. Someone on the neighborhood page said they'd seen her yelling at a customer, which had never happened. Another claimed she'd had a history of issues. None of it was true, but truth rarely stood a chance once people decided what they wanted to believe. Jenny didn't fight it. She'd seen what happened when people tried to argue with shadows. Instead, she stayed home. She stopped checking her phone. The coffee pot in her apartment grew dusty. The shoes by the door stayed lined up, untouched. The boy's absence hollowed her mornings. The act of setting a plate, of folding the napkin, of pretending it was a mistake, those small routines had given shape to her days. Without them, her hands felt useless. One night, 2 weeks after the termination, she found a package on her doorstep. No name. No return address. Just a brown paper wrapper and a string. Inside, she found the boy's book. The same one he'd read each morning. Tucked between the pages was a note, written in a child's uneven scrawl, "Thank you for not making me feel poor." She pressed the paper to her chest. The next day, she walked to the diner, not to plead or return, but just to see. The building looked smaller somehow. The neon sign flickered. The morning crowd sat in their usual places. Harold at the counter. Kathy in the back, not looking up. Jenny stood across the street and watched as a man in a suit approached the entrance. He hesitated, then turned away. Later that week, her mailbox held an envelope with no stamp. Inside was a folded flyer, a listing for a local shelter's new breakfast program for school-aged children. No name. No signature. Just a small drawing in the corner. A plate of pancakes. She sat on her apartment floor, the flyer in her lap, surrounded by silence. She had nothing left to offer, no job, no position, no paycheck. But something had started. And it had her handwriting all over it. Jenny didn't apply for another waitressing job. Her resume stayed closed on her desk, and the job board stayed unopened in her browser. Every time she passed Rosie's diner, she turned her face just slightly, enough to make sure no one recognized her. The building, once a fixture in her routine, now felt like a monument to something broken. But the mornings didn't stay empty. 3 weeks after the package arrived, she received a phone call from a woman named Elise Turner, who ran a small family resource center a few towns over. Elise's voice was warm and slow, like someone who didn't rush people. She had heard about Jenny from a shelter volunteer, a boy who'd come through briefly, quiet and hungry, who'd asked if the lady from the diner was working there too. Elise said the center had just launched a pilot breakfast program for food-insecure children. It wasn't much. Some donated cereal, eggs if they were lucky, toast most days, but they needed help managing mornings. They couldn't pay much. Maybe not at all. But they could promise a stove, a safe kitchen, and children who would show up with hungry eyes. Jenny started that week. The kitchen was small and drafty. The silverware didn't match. The toaster jammed more often than it worked. But none of it mattered. The children came quietly, some alone, some dropped off by older siblings. Most didn't talk. All of them ate. Jenny learned their names slowly, like earning the pieces of a puzzle that had to be offered, not forced. She brought pancakes on Thursdays. At first, it was just for 1 or 2. Then word spread. Within a month, Thursday mornings became crowded. Jenny would arrive before dawn, measuring flour and cracking eggs under flickering fluorescent lights. The smell of griddle cakes brought the same stillness to the room as snow, soft, solemn, welcome. One morning in December, a black SUV pulled into the gravel lot of the resource center. 2 men stepped out. Suits, polished shoes, one with a camera bag. Jenny recognized the look of people who didn't belong but came with purpose. They introduced themselves as part of a regional military family outreach unit. Said they'd been trying to track her down. She didn't understand, at first. But they had a letter. Official stationery. Embossed seal. The letter described a boy whose father had died overseas the year before. The boy had moved through 3 temporary housing placements, all within 50 miles of Jenny's town. He rarely spoke. Barely ate. But every morning, he read the same book, a fantasy novel his father had read to him before deployment. That was the book Jenny had found on her doorstep. According to the outreach report, the boy had mentioned a woman at a diner who gave him pancakes without ever asking his name. He called her the safe lady. The letter was a formal commendation. Not from the diner. Not from the town. But from the U.S. Military Family Support Office. It thanked her for providing stability and nourishment to a dependent of an active-duty soldier at a time of transition and hardship. It was signed by the fallen soldier's commanding officer. Jenny read it twice. Then folded it quietly and placed it in the front pocket of her apron. Later that week, a metal plaque was delivered to the center. Small, understated. Mounted on the hallway wall outside the kitchen. It read, "In honor of quiet service. To Jenny Millers, who fed 1 child and helped many." The next Thursday, pancakes were served with syrup in ceramic pitchers. A local bakery donated extra butter. Someone brought in fresh fruit. Jenny never asked how they knew what day it was. The boy never returned to the shelter. His new family moved out of state. But postcards started arriving every few months. Always unsigned. Always with a drawing, sometimes of pancakes, sometimes of a woman with an apron, sometimes just a booth with a book and a glass of water. Jenny kept them in the drawer beside the stove. Sometimes, when the kitchen was empty and the sun came through the cracked blinds in long, golden stripes, she would pull one out, read it silently, and place it back without a word. By spring, others had *in volunteering. A retired school nurse. A man who used to run a bakery. A teenager looking for service hours. The kitchen grew louder, fuller. But the booth by the window was left empty, reserved. Jenny never returned to Rosie's diner. But sometimes, former customers wandered into the center and recognized her. They didn't mention the past. They asked where to place the donations. The town never formally apologized. No one admitted their gossip. No article was written. But the hush that had once surrounded her name was replaced by something quieter, respect. She lived alone, still above the pharmacy. But now there were knocks on her door. Children asking for recipes. Parents delivering thank-you notes. Volunteers requesting help with pancake batter. She kept working, not for praise, not for penance, but because the routine meant something again. The napkin folding. The syrup warming. The simple service of feeding someone without needing to know their story. Kindness had no memory, no condition, and no reward. It was enough. Sometimes, doing the right thing isn't loud. It's a plate of pancakes and an empty booth. It's being there when no one else is. It's staying soft in a world that pushes people to harden. Kindness without question is enough.